Hello, mathematicians! Welcome to Number Corner. For Number Corner today, we are going to be looking at our second graph for this month. You will need a few things before we get started. You'll need a whiteboard, marker, and an eraser. If you don't have a whiteboard, marker, and eraser, you can use a piece of paper and a pencil. Pause the video now to get what you need. When we look at our graphs this month, we might notice a connection between the graph and some equations on our calendar marker. We will closely observe 5 different graphs. We've already looked at one graph and set of equations. Usually the graphs we look at will already be posted on the calendar, but you may get a sneak peek of a marker that is coming up. Let's have a look at the graph we will be interpreting today. Take a moment to look at this graph. I want you to think about some things you notice as you look. You may be noticing a few different things. You may have noticed that on this graph, we don't have any pictures like we did on our graph about cats and dogs. Instead, we have a darker gray bar going up to the number 13 and a lighter gray bar going up to the number 11. You may have noticed that on the bottom, it says go shopping and spend the night. You may also have noticed the word students along the side and the numbers that go from 1, counting by ones, all the way to the number 14. You may also have noticed the word title and a line at the top. Show a connection if you noticed any of those different things. I should see a lot of connections. There's much to look at on this graph. Like we talked about last time, we have different kinds of graphs that we look at. And like I said, this graph doesn't have pictures like the cat and dog graph we looked at before. This graph is called a bar graph. A bar graph is a graph that uses vertical or horizontal bars to show how large specific values are. In our graph, we're seeing this darker gray bar go all the way up to the number 13. That's how many students chose the first option. We see our lighter gray bar go all the way up to number 11. That's how many students chose the second option. We'll talk a lot more about that as we go. Let's think about something else. What do you think the survey question was? Now, if you remember from last time, when we're looking at a graph, we're getting data or information. And usually that information is collected in a survey. What do you think this survey was asking? What did the person who made this want to find out about these students who took the survey? Some clues are at the bottom labels: go shopping or spend the night. Now you may have been thinking a few different things. Some things you might have been thinking were maybe this question is asking what's something you would rather do with a friend. Maybe you and your friends really enjoy going shopping. Maybe that's something you like to do on the weekends. Maybe you really like to have sleepovers or spend the night with your friends. You could also say this question was, what activity do you like to do better with friends? The question that we will kind of go with today, because it makes sense from our information, is what would you rather do with a friend? Now that we know our survey question of what would you rather do with a friend, what do you think a good title for this graph would be? We need to know a title to understand our information better. One idea you may have had for a title is activities to do with a friend. That would be a good choice. Now, these activities might be things we do on the weekend. Another option would be activity choices for the weekend. Either title works well because it uses the information from our graph. Now that we've noticed a few things and we've figured out what our survey is asking, now's where we're going to need our whiteboards, markers, and erasers, or paper and pencil to answer a few more questions about this graph. Now, I filled in our title at the top and our survey question. What activity would you rather do with a friend? Now I'd like you to look at the bottom of the video where we have 4 different equations. These equations are going to help us as we answer our questions. Now, we already know that we're looking at a bar graph because we don't have pictures like we had pictures of the cats and dogs before. Now I want you to think. What do you think every space stands for? We have one space filled in, another space, and another all the way up to the top. What do those spaces mean? Now, if you were thinking that those spaces represent one student's choice, give yourself a big pat on the back. That's exactly what they represent. We use our bar graphs to show how many students chose each option. Now I'm going to need you to use your whiteboards to write an equation. I want you to write an equation to show me how many students all together participated in this survey. Have a look at your calendar markers down here. Will any of these equations help us to write our equation? One of them is very helpful. Take a moment to think about which one it might be and write your equation. Now, if you were thinking the equation that would help us right now to know how many students participated in this survey is the equation of 13 plus 11 equals something. If that's what you were thinking, if that's the equation you wrote, give yourself a big pat on the back. Excellent work. Now, we can see that we have 13 students over here that chose to go shopping. I could even draw a line all the way over on my graph to the number 13. It's kind of a messy line, but it works. Now I also know that we have 11 students that chose spend the night as their activity to do with a friend. If I make a line at the top and follow it all the way over to the number 11, that shows me there's 11 students that chose spend the night. Now you can use any strategy that works for you to add these numbers together. If you haven't solved this on your whiteboard yet, go ahead and do that with me now. I'm going to use the splitting strategy. I know that if I have my 2 10s together from 13 and 11, I have 20 with my 2 10s. And then I know if I add my 1s, my 3 and my 1, I get the number 4. So all together, I know that there's 24 students participating in this survey. Show a connection if that's the answer that you got too. Good work. Let's look at the next question. The next question is asking how many fewer students like to spend the night than go shopping. Fewer means less. I want you to think, is this an addition equation or a subtraction equation? Write it on your boards. Now, if you were thinking that this will be a subtraction equation, great thinking. That equation is here for us, 13 minus 11. We know that this is the right equation because it's asking us how many fewer students like to spend the night than go shopping. We are looking at the difference between our two bars. We can even see on our graph, this is a great way to help us solve this problem, that if we drew a line, just like we did before at the top of spend the night all the way over, we would see that there are 2 more spaces filled in. So we know that 13 minus 11 equals 2. There are 2 more students that chose to go shopping over spend the night. Now, our last question to look at, we won't need your whiteboards quite yet, is what questions do the remaining equations represent? That's a little tricky. We haven't talked about anything like that yet. Let's go ahead and have a look at that. If we're looking at the equation 24 minus 13 equals something, we get the answer of 11. 11 is the number of students that chose spend the night. If we look at the equation 11 plus something equals 24, that something is the number 13. There are 13 students that chose to go shopping. We'll talk more about finding out the information from our equations as we look at more graphs. This gets a little tricky. What I need you to do now to finish up our activity for today is I need you to show your teachers that you watched this video. You don't have an extra activity to do in your Number Corner books, but you do have a super secret password that you need to put into Seesaw to show that you watched this whole video. That super secret password is the 2 words, bar graph, because we learned a lot about a bar graph today. So when you get to Seesaw, you'll have a little spot right here to type the words bar graph to show that you did your work for today. Thank you for joining me, mathematicians. I will see you next time for Number Corner.